While you can't win your league during your fantasy football draft, there are certainly decisions and mistakes that you could make that are going to severely lessen your chances of winning your league. Inside of today's video, we are going to be breaking down the #1 draft strategy for 2023 fantasy football that you guys need to use. At the beginning of the video, we are going to be talking about some very general draft picks. Then we're going to be moving into my favorite draft strategy for the season, and then we're going to close the video out by doing a mock draft using that draft strategy. Before we can get into things, though, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into the #1 draft strategy for 2023 fantasy football. So it is very important to go into your fantasy football draft with an incredibly open mind. Locking yourself into any strategy could lead to you making incredibly bad decisions throughout the draft. For instance, if you believe that you need to go for a quarterback in the 3rd round, what could happen is you could be in a draft and Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts, they're gone already. They got drafted in the 2nd round. Maybe some crazy person drafted Patrick Mahomes in the 1st round. And then that may cause you, since you went into the draft thinking, oh, I need to get quarterback in the 3rd round, to reach on a guy like Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, which will hurt your team. Now, obviously, I do not believe that Lamar or Burrow are bad players by any means, but reaching a round or two for a player to fit your quote-unquote draft strategy, your draft agenda, is idiotic. Before we actually break down that big name draft strategy, I want to be talking about some more general principles when it comes to drafting. Early on, you want to wrap a metaphorical condom around your fantasy football team. You want to take the picks as safe as they get. Now, that does not mean that you can't look for upside, hunt for upside in your draft, but taking unneeded risks is incredibly foolish. For instance, taking a player who is currently hurt with a suspect injury timeline is far from ideal. I talk about this a lot on the channel, but in fantasy football, the injuries, they're going to haunt you. They are going to hunt you down like Liam Neeson in Taken, and they're going to get you good. So try to avoid injuries early on. There is also a question when it comes to the risk of these running backs that are currently holding out. Now, we all know Saquon Barkley folded instantly. It took just a couple of days after that running back Zoom meeting for Saquon Barkley to get like $900,000 more and fold, right? But Josh Jacobs, all the reports kind of seem like he's coming back, but that's still a question mark. Jonathan Taylor right now, there's a large question mark with, is he going to get traded? And if so, which team is he going to get traded to? For some people, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor might be very large risks, but I think that is something you want to determine yourself. I personally believe that Josh Jacobs is going to show up a couple days before week 1 and then get that workhorse running back usage that we saw last season. Jonathan Taylor, to me, seems a little bit more risky because I think there's a chance he doesn't get traded, and if that is the case, he might be riding the pine the whole season and just not showing up. The deeper you get into your draft, though, is where you need to be taking risks, right? Early on, you don't want to take these incredible risks that could implode your team, right? Drop a nuke on your fantasy football team. You don't win later in the draft drafting very safely. You need to hunt for the large upside picks that could be the potential league winners. For instance, trying to select the Chiefs' #1 wide receiver could provide humongous upside, right? That could be a league winner if Mahomes just locks on to one of these wide receivers. Whereas drafting a guy like Tyler Boyd, who we all know how good Tyler Boyd is, right? He's going to be decent week in and week out, but he lacks that huge game upside, that game where he rips off the game breaker like he's playing NFL Street and has that huge game, right? Because Chase and Higgins are there and currently healthy. So what I'm trying to tell you is later on in fantasy football drafts, you should take risks because it is a lot easier to cut bait with those later on players, right? You draft a guy in the 10th round, he ends up being garbage 2 weeks in. Guess what? Like a vasectomy, you cut him, you get rid of him. Whereas in the 3rd round, if you take a huge risk on a player and it's not panning out, you might just have to take it and just hold the guy on your bench which feels disgusting. The later you get in the draft, the less draft capital you obviously invest in the player, and the easier it is to cut bait with them. My favorite draft strategy this season is the hero running back strategy, but before we go a little bit too in-depth into hero running back, I want to explain why it makes so much sense for fantasy football in the year 2023. Earlier on in the video, we talked about avoiding risks in the early rounds of drafts. Running backs are the riskiest position to draft in fantasy football in the early rounds, mostly due to injury. According to Kevin Duffy of Mass Live, it is very clear that the overall injury rates favor the wide receiver position over not just the last 3 years, over the last decade. Running back injury rates. Playing in all games, running backs 28.5%. While maybe that number is a little higher than you thought, if you compare that to wide receivers playing in all games, it is 48%. So you are getting a lot more safety early on when drafting a wide receiver. In terms of running backs missing 1 to 2 games, that's 30.5%. Missing 3 to 4 games, 16.5%. Missing 5 to 6 games, 7.5%. And missing 7+ games, 17%. Making the average number of games missed for a running back over the last decade is 3.3 games. Now, I talk about this a lot. I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, but the stats don't lie. You don't need to be a fucking doctor to figure out that running backs are clearly more likely to get hurt. The median number of games missed for running backs is 2. In terms of wide receiver injury rate, like we talked about, playing in all games, 48%. Missing 1 to 2 games, 25%. Missing 3 to 4 games, 11.5%. Missing 5 to 6 games, 3%. And missing 7+ games, 12%. The average number of games missed for a wide receiver is just 2 compared to 3.3 for running back. And the medium number of games missed by the wide receiver position is 1 compared to 2 when it comes to running backs. So I don't want this information to make you stay clear away from running backs, right? Like thinking you can't draft a running back early on. Of course, that is not the case. But when you select that running back, there is inherently a lot more risk that they get smoked, they get injured, and miss a bunch of games, or potentially a majority of the season. And while I don't believe that this next part of information that I'm going to be talking about is super important, it was very telling when I learned about it, so I figured I would talk to you guys about it as well. Injury rates by age. So we're going to be talking about wide receivers first. Wide receivers are overwhelmingly healthy from the time they enter the league to their age 27 seasons. Again, this is all from that article. Nearly 80% of receivers 27 and younger miss 2 games or fewer. However, the number begins to decline around the age 28 season, and extended absences become much more likely. So early on, wide receivers age 21 through 24, 79.5% miss 2 games or fewer, right? So you are being really, really safe. You draft these young guns. This is why we point towards Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase to be the number 1 and number 2 overall picks in your fantasy football drafts. Wide receivers 25 to 27, 76.7% missed 2 games or fewer. Wide receivers 28 to 30, 68.8% missed 2 games or fewer. But the real drop-off comes with wide receivers 31 plus, right? Those old heads, 63.2% missed 2 games or fewer. Now, I actually believe, again, I'm not a doctor, but as modern medicine progresses, I think these numbers are actually going to continue to increase, right? I think the younger receivers and even the older wide receivers are going to continue to, as the years go on, we look 10 years down the line, they are going to be able to stay a lot more healthy because of modern medicine. So again, I don't want you to take this as like complete fact. Well, it is fact, but I don't need you to take this as like the Bible for your fantasy football draft. Don't draft these super old wide receivers, but it's important to note that, hey, the younger guy is probably more likely to stay healthy, which should be really shocking to no one. And also, this does point towards the fact that, you know, these rookie wide receivers that you take that deep shot in drafts, Stephen Curry style, are going to be healthy at the end of the season. The older wide receivers, the vets, might be hurt, and that's what gives them the chance to smash towards the end of the season. In terms of running backs, you really shouldn't be as afraid to draft older running backs. While this seems a little bit crazy from the article, and I thought this was crazy as Well, the running backs in the 27 to 28 age range are actually healthy more often than their younger counterparts. But this is an important but. This is a big but. Shout out Kim Kardashian. It sharply declines around age 29. Running backs age 21 to 22, 56% miss 2 games or fewer. Running backs 23 to 24, 60.7% miss 2 games or fewer. Running backs 25 to 26, 57.9% missed 2 games or fewer. 27 to 28, 69.2%. Very nice. I like. Missed 2 games or fewer. But then the age cliff hits like fucking Mike Tyson in his prime. 29 plus, 43.5% missed 2 games or fewer. So again, don't take this as the prophecy, but these are important things to know entering your draft. So now we are going to pivot to what my favorite fantasy football strategy is. Again, do not trap yourself inside of some metaphorical box just following this draft strategy. But if the draft falls your way, which it's going to a lot of time, you are going to be able to implore the best fantasy football draft strategy this season. If you've enjoyed thus far, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button down below. It helps me out a ton. So you are going to use the hero running back draft strategy, which is drafting one running back with either of your first 2 round picks. So round 1, you see a running back sitting there looking pretty, then bang, you draft them. If you like the receiver there, then you wait till the 2nd round to get that hero running back. With the other picks, you are going to go hammer time up on the wide receiver position, right? You could mix in a quarterback. You could even mix in a tight end. You might be able to mix it up fucking Chef Curry style and draft both a quarterback and tight end before you select your running back too. That really just depends how much of cojones you got, right? Are you willing to wait that deep to select your running back number 2? This allows your running back number 1 to be the hero running back. Then, once you fill out your roster and maybe even a couple bench spots or 2, you want to just spam the running back button, right? I'm talking about smashing that button like there's no tomorrow. Utilizing this strategy means that while it might feel a little bit gross for your running back 2 week 1, you are going to be able to play your running back 2 based upon matchups. And if you find that late round stud, there's a chance that you just found the guy you want to play every single week in the draft. And we all know there's a lot of injuries at running back, and the running back 2 spot could be found off of the waiver wire. You might pick up the second coming of Bo Jackson because, you know, they're on the waiver wire, someone big name running back gets hurt, and they're inserted into a great situation. I think this strategy works best in 3 wide receiver leagues or 2 flex leagues, but I don't want to say that it's impossible to use in your normal 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. I think it works just as fine there, but obviously in those leagues, you don't need to punt off running back for as long. In some drafts, hero running back may not be as ideal because running backs are falling, right? There are going to be rooms where everyone is, as Pete Overzet would say, pissing yellow, right? They're just taking wide receivers off of the board at an absorbent rate because everyone loves wide receivers this season. So if the running backs are falling, you may want to scoop another before you really go off on drafting some additional wide receivers. If this happens in your draft, this is exactly why we talk about not putting yourself in that box early on with a given strategy. If you love some value at running back in the middle of the draft, right? I know people always say avoid the dead zone running back. Well, if Alexander Mattison is sitting there and you love Alexander Mattison, then go right ahead and draft him. Right? You don't always just have to follow the strategy, but I think it's a good blueprint to enter the draft with. And there is also another strategy that plays off of this idea called the double hero running back, fucking Superman and Batman together. The double hero running back strategy is pretty self-explanatory, right? Instead of one running back being drafted in the first 2 rounds of the draft, you draft, shocker, 2. And then in that scenario, you can just wait even longer, right? Because now your running back 2 spot isn't like spooking you a little bit. You're starting to get a little worried in the draft, and then bam, you just kind of reach on a running back, right? You are able to, you're afforded to wait a lot longer because, again, you're assuming the health of those 2 guys. You want to be drafting like you're right. This is also another draft tip. Draft your team like you're correct, right? You don't need to be fucking handcuffing your running back in the draft. I don't really like handcuffing at all unless it's in the bedroom. Wink, 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 if you know what I mean, fellas. So, or ladies. You know, they might be watching as well. Maybe they like that as well. So, now we are going to pivot into doing an actual mock draft using this strategy. But before we do, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the best place to play best ball fantasy football this summer. If you don't know what best ball is, it's the best part about fantasy football. It's the drafts, and that's it. There's no waivers, there's no trades, and there is no in-season management. At the end of every single week, Underdog automatically puts the highest scores into your lineup for you. So you get to do the most fun thing, the draft, and avoid the less fun things, right? Trying to stay up on Tuesday night, doing all your waivers. Who wants to do that, right? So you automatically draft your team. That's it. At the end of every single week, Underdog throws the best scores into your lineup for you. They have the biggest fantasy football contest ever. $25 to enter, 150 max entries, $3 million to first place, $15 million in total prizes in the Best Ball Mania 4. They also have regular, basically like a league. You draft versus 11 other people with as low of a buy-in as $3. The first two places make money. If this sounds fun to you, make sure you use promo code Notorious or click on the link in the video description for a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. Minimum deposit bonus is $10. So if you deposit 10, you get additional 10, 100, additional 100, 50, additional 50. Pretty self-explanatory. If you guys have any questions about Underdog, leave them in the comments. Love you guys all so much. Let's get back into the video. All right, so we're into the mock draft section of the video. Again, this strategy works in half or full PPR. We're going to be doing PPR for this mock, 12 teams from the 8th pick. The pick doesn't really matter. It works from any pick. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, tight end, flex, kicker, defense, and 6 bench spots. So let's get on into the draft. So as we do this draft, we are also going to be discussing my ideology of potentially jumping off ship when it comes to the strategy, right? There are going to be situations in your draft where, hey, while you maybe wanted to do hero running back, you don't want to trap yourself into a box, you can jump ship, do something different, maybe go double hero running back, or maybe go 0 running back and spam a bunch of wide receivers off the rip. So based upon how the draft went early on, Cooper Kupp at the 1.08 to me is a no-brainer pick. This guy could be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football, even though maybe shoring up that running back, that hero running back in the first round might be ideal for some of you guys. Again, I'm not trying to lock myself into any given strategy, so I just took the best player available in the first round where we were picking, and that was Cooper Kupp. Now, it's a no-brainer decision to go with Tony Pollard here. Wouldn't mind Derrick Henry at that pick either, but we're going to go with Tony Pollard. This is a guy that has very little competition behind him. Now, obviously, there are the looming reports that maybe Jerry Jones swings his meat over his shoulder like Indiana Jones, throws that thing out there, right, and goes ahead and gets Mr. Jonathan Taylor from the Colts, but I honestly do not believe that is what is going to happen. I think Tony Pollard is in a situation to see just a ridiculous amount of work in this offense, especially since he is on that franchise tag. So now we got our hero running back, and the best part about this is, as you can see, when you're doing a real draft, you are avoiding a gross range at running back. Now, I like Jahmyr Gibbs, I like Joe Mixon, but at the end of the day, the wide receivers in this range just feel a lot more fruitful, right? Calvin Ridley has top 3 upside at wide receiver. So does, in my opinion, Metcalf. I don't like Metcalf, but I think there is a way where he finishes this season that highly. I like Amari Cooper a ton as well. We are going to be going with Calvin Ridley at this pick. I have seen so many clips out of training camp. Everyone seems to panic, think this guy's a little too old, this, that, and the other thing, think he might not have it anymore, but I think Calvin Ridley is going to be just fine. After Calvin Ridley here, we are going to look to potentially keep spamming the wide receiver position unless we like a tight end. Now, I think TJ Hawkinson is one of the most boring picks in fantasy football because he's probably going to be a top 3 tight end, probably finish number 3. He's very safe, but on a week in, week out standpoint, is he really ever going to hang his nuts on a defense and score 30 points? Probably not, so we're going to continue with the wide receiver reign here. Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuel, DeAndre Hopkins, Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, all still available. If Amari Cooper wasn't here, I'd probably go with DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Hopkins. One of those guys, Watson, Deontay Johnson as well. So we're going to go with Amari Cooper at this spot. I'm a huge fan of this Cleveland Browns offense this season, but again, I'm not trying to get very heavy into player takes when talking about this draft strategy because I think it's more important to kind of just understand how you look to implore the strategy or implore your strategy into the draft, whereas talking about a million different players, which is why I'm not rambling off all of the names of the players going in the draft. If you want to pause and look at the draft board, go right ahead and do so. So we're back up on the clock here. We got Tony Pollard, Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley, and Amari Cooper. Darren Waller is still available, and he is the perfect pick inside of the 5th round. I really think that Darren Waller is going to smash this season. I think Darren Waller has been slept upon all offseason, and now everyone's kind of hopping on the bandwagon because of that preseason game. But if you guys have been watching for a while, you would know that I've been banging the drum aggressively for Darren Waller for a very long time, basically all offseason, ever since he was traded to the Giants from the Las Vegas Raiders. So this leaves us in kind of a predicament spot at the quarterback position, right? Because all of the main quarterbacks have came off the board, the big 3, Joe Burrow, Fields, Lamar, Herbert, the pervert, as well as Trevor Lawrence. So again, don't trap yourself into the strategy. Don't think, hey, I need to force myself to get a quarterback here before I draft a running back. Don't do that, because in the 6th round, while I like Watson, I like Tua, I like Dak, Daniel Jones, all these guys, I don't want to reach up and pick them because all of the guys with that really big upside and the safety are gone. Now, again, we talk about this later on in the draft. We talked early on in the video that, hey, you don't want to be super safe as you get deeper into the draft. But in the 6th round, I don't think you need to reach on Deshaun Watson or anything like that. So I think we are going to go with a wide receiver here and then start the generational hammering of the running back position. Maybe some of these running backs will even fall back to us that we like. So best receivers available: Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk, Hollywood Brown, Michael Pittman, Mike Evans, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, Brandon Cooks, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith, and the Jigba. We are going to go with Michael Pittman Jr. There are a lot of fantasy channels that talk negatively about Pittman. There are a lot of channels like myself that love Michael Pittman. I am going to keep it very, very simple. Simple Jack from Tropic Thunder style on Michael Pittman Jr. I draft him because he is going to get volume. This is a team that has not a lot of talent at wide receiver. This is a team that is going to force the rock to Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman was getting targeted a lot through his first years of his career. The problem is the quarterback situation was garbage. I think Anthony Richardson is going to be the savior there in Indianapolis for Michael Pittman Jr. So we're back up on the clock here, and while Javonte Williams may definitely be risky, he is the perfect type of running back to take on a team like this. While there is definitely risk, the upside is incredibly high, right? Maybe Sean Payton completely 180s this offense. Maybe they're not a flaming pile of dog shit like last season. So we are going to go with Javonte Williams here. Again, there is definitely risk, but that is why we are going to hammer the running back position so that we have other guys that could potentially slot in for Javonte Williams week 1 or beyond, right? Maybe Javonte Williams ends up being a humongous big bust. So looking at running backs, Isaiah Pacheco, Antonio Gibson, Khalil Herbert, AJ Dillon, Brian Robinson. I have Isaiah Pacheco ranked the highest. It seems like he just keeps falling down draft boards. He's a guy that was banged up early on in the offseason, but he's been practicing with the team recently. It is definitely a crowded running back room, but at the end of the day, in the 8th round, that feels like way too strong of a fall for Isaiah Pacheco, right? At some point, even if you're kind of scared of the situation, in the 8th round, Isaiah Pacheco, the running back 1 on the Chiefs. Now, I know he's not catching a lot of passes, but maybe he does this year. We don't know. Maybe it's possible, especially since it seems like the game plan for the Kansas City Chiefs is just to kind of wait on using McKinnon until later on in the season. So we're going to just continue this hammering of the running back position. I will warn you that in real fantasy football drafts, even though everyone here already has their quarterback aside from one team, we do know that some people might take 2 quarterbacks by the 10th round. So if you love a guy like Tua or Daniel Jones, you might want to reach on them, and not really reach on them. You might just want to take them at this point. We ain't handcuffing Javonte Williams, so we're going to go with Antonio Gibson here. This is another guy we've been banging the drum for all offseason. I love this Commanders offense this year with the new offensive coordinator in Eric Bieniemy. I think Antonio Gibson is a really talented running back. Last year, I was completely off of him. He sucked in training camp, all of this negative news, but it seems like he's back on the saddle now. We're clearly going to go with a quarterback here. Tua might be a large risk to some, but to me, I get the risk, but I also see the humongous amount of upside he has. If he was not there, we probably would have went with Daniel Jones at that spot, and if Danny Dimes wasn't available, we probably would have went with more of a 2 quarterback approach with Anthony Richardson and maybe Geno Smith in the next round. Back up on the clock here, we are going to be selecting, you guessed it, probably probably another running back. I feel very confident in my first 4 wide receivers, Pittman, Cooper, Ridley, and Kupp. If you were a little bit more nervous about those guys, or maybe you didn't get the wide receivers that you loved, then you probably shouldn't have drafted wide receiver, and you should have, flip-flopped off the strategy and maybe drafted a running back in that range. So we're back up on the clock here. We're going to go with Tank Bigsby. They'll tell me it's going to be a reach, but they can give me a reach around on that because Tank Bigsby has huge upside in this Jaguars offense. I don't love ETN this year. ETN struggled last year to catch passes, struggled on the goal line, and I think Tank is going to flourish in that situation. Now it's time to hop back on the wide receiver bandwagon. Since most weeks with this strategy, we want to be going with 3 wide receivers, so Kupp, Ridley, and then someone in the flex. We probably want another wide receiver that has some solid upside here. We are going to be going with Isaiah Hodgins on this team. I think he could be the #1 receiver in New York with the Giants. I think that this is a Giants offense you want pieces of. I think this is not the Giants offense from the last couple of years. It is much different now under Brian Daboll, and that was the case last season. We are going to close things out here with 1 more wide receiver here. We have Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams, Pacheco, Gibson, and Bigsby. I think that's good for the running backs. It would feel kind of foolish to reach on a running back in this range that I don't really love. And plus, we don't need a backup quarterback or a backup tight end, especially a backup tight end, right? We drafted Darren Waller so early, it would be foolish to kind of try to mitigate the quote-unquote injury risk of Waller by picking some other tight end in the draft. So Michael Gallup, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Alec Pierce, KJ Osborne, Van Jefferson, Curtis Samuel, Hunter Renfrow, a lot of guys available. We are going to go with Van Jefferson here, probably going to be the #2 receiver on the team, but we did draft Cooper Kupp. So that's enough to push me away from him and go with another receiver. We're going to go with Jonathan Mingo, that young gun wide receiver with the upside too. DJ Chark's already hurt now. Terrace Marshall's hurt. Maybe Jonathan Mingo, week fucking 1, is the #2 receiver on this team behind Adam Thielen. So we're back up on the clock here. And then kicker defense, we're not going to talk too much about them. But for defense, you want to draft the defense playing the worst offense week 1, or an offense you believe is going to struggle. Maybe you see an offense that you think is going to be good on the year, but not hot in that matchup. For example, once Kyler Murray returns, I think that the Arizona Cardinals offense might actually be not complete and utter dick cheese, but the Commanders play the Cardinals week 1 without Kyler Murray, so that is a defense that I have been targeting very heavily. To recap our team, we got Tua, Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams, Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley, Darren Waller, Amari Cooper, Washington Commanders, Tyler Bass, Pittman, Pacheco, Gibson, Bigsby, Hodgins, and Jonathan Mingo. So looking back at the board, it was very easy to set up our team to have a hero running back. Now, early on, with the first 3 picks, it is a little bit more difficult, but if you're one of the middle or late round guys, or late first round guys, right, you're going to be finding it a lot easier to utilize this strategy. So I like our team a lot. Had we have had Bijan fall there, I think we may have considered Bijan over Cooper Kupp potentially, and then that could have led to a 2 double hero running back start. So I like this team a ton. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about this strategy. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you plan to use it? Let me know. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great one. And as always,